can sit less formally. You can sit on a chair too if you prefer this during the teisho, as you know. So today in the Catholic liturgy, in the Christian liturgy, it's the Feast of the Ascension, 40 days after Easter. According to the Apostles, this was around for 40 days. And I always like to, explore a little what that really means and what it means in a larger context of whatever denomination you are. I mean, we Christians say that the divine and the human were perfectly united in Christ, and we should be exploring in our own being how the absolute and the relative, or Zen terms, are perfectly together in our daily life. And St. Paul always points out that, the mysteries of Christ are our mysteries. And Zen would be perfectly in agreement with that. That whatever happened to him, that happens to us. In Paul's terms, we were buried with Christ, and rise with Christ, and we rose with him, and we were sat down in heavenly places with him, according to St. Paul. So in other words, those mysteries are our mysteries. And how can we explore that, from, both from a Christian, but also from a Buddhist, a Zen point of view? Again, the central message of Mahayana Buddhism is that emptiness is form and form is emptiness. That is to say, the absolute and the relative are inseparable, right here and now. So, if St. Paul says we've already risen with Christ and we've already sat with him in heavenly places, that already is showing that even in Christianity, we're not talking about geography. We're not talking about later after we die. We're not talking about going up to heaven somewhere. And it's important to realize that also, even in our understanding of the ascension of Christ, that it's not about geography. In olden times, we thought that heaven really was up there. And now all we know is that there's about 300 billion galaxies up there. So that can't be right. To say that, basically we have to listen to what the angel said in the dramatization of Christ's ascension that we find in the Acts of the Apostles. Men of Galilee, what are you looking up there for? And we have to be saying the same things to ourselves. Zen would remind us of that too. Stop looking up there. Look, period. Right where you are, here and now. The absolute and the relative are right here and now. The heavenly places are right here and now. It was Hakuin said in that famous poem, this land is the pure land, pure land Buddhism. It's not another place, it's right here. And this very moment is the Buddha body. This is the pure land. This very moment is the pure land. This very body is the Buddha body. This very body is the risen body. This very body is the ascended body. Right here, now. It's interesting. Even if you look at some of Christian theology, for example, the hymn we have for the Feast of the Ascension, it says, let there be common joy with the heavenly inhabitants, because first that he showed himself to them, but that he didn't leave us. So he's still here and he's still there. There's no difference. Whereas one sermon that the Carthusians read today from Maximus of Turin, it says, and coming down, quotes, coming down from heaven, he didn't leave where he was. He didn't go, and he didn't. And when he went up, he didn't leave us, because it's not about geography. What is it? Both in his case and in ours. So I propose what we're talking about here is changes in consciousness. Both the dying and the rising and the ascending, it's all about changes in consciousness. Change in consciousness, which includes our whole being. As we know, it's not just in the head. All of reality is alive, all of reality is conscious. In its different ways, on different levels, and that's the whole point. We go to a different level of consciousness, and the higher, quotes, the consciousness is, the deeper it is, the more it integrates everything, which I think is the point of Christ's resurrection and ascension as well. So I often like to say we ascend into the depths. We go into the depths of things, beginning and especially our own hearts, our own being. We ascend to a higher level of consciousness by going deeper, not only into ourselves, but into the heart of everything. And of course, there's no separation, no difference. That's what a higher level of consciousness is. Each higher level, or deeper level of consciousness, is more intense and more connected to the absolute and the relative. More interconnected among itself and closer connected to the absolute, whatever that is. In other words, a fuller awareness of everything. And that's what we're talking about. So what is it like? Well, again, the hymn for the Ascension speaks about that Christ opened up the paradise that Aperiens paradisum quem protoplastus clausurat, which is, he opened up the paradise that the protoplast closed. Who's the protoplast? Protoplastus. That means the first made from the clay, the first man, so Adam. Don't blame Eve for this. So that paradisiac state, if you will, is kind of what the resurrection is about. Now, that's preceded by the going down into the depths. That's first of all doing our soul work, going down on the heroic journey, going down deep in that sense, meeting the shadow, all that stuff. That's the death and resurrection. That's the death followed by the resurrection part. Dying to the ego, opening up, dying to all the stuff that's not harmonized, that's leading us away, the greed, hatred, and ignorance, to come back up. That's the death and resurrection part. But that the resurrection feels like this integration, this luminosity, this connection, this awareness, which is what they meant by the Garden of Eden. Again, it's not a place, Iraq or anywhere else, the Tigris, Euphrates. No, it's a state of consciousness. Before the separation into duality, the tree of good and evil, Adam and Eve, all that stuff, even that separation, Adam and Eve. Before all of that, you have the integration and the interconnection, the wholeness. And that's really what the resurrection is about restoring. So we rise from the egotism, we rise to that level of consciousness when there's a luminosity and a connection with everything. With the absolute and the relative, with everything. With God and our fellow human beings, to use Christian language, and with the whole cosmos. So it's not about going anywhere except to this different level of consciousness. So what's the ascension? I mean, is there a different modality to that, say even within Buddhist thought? Can we see a different level here too that would illustrate what we're talking about? Well, that's an interesting point. Theologically, Christianly speaking, there's no real difference between the resurrection and ascension. It's both about the luminosity and the connection and reconnection with absolute and relative. But you might say it's more intense, more connected, beyond even what our mind or bodies could grasp before. Kind of like going back even further into the absolute, which doesn't mean separate from the relative, just means more deeply connected to the relative in a way which might not be so obvious to feel or understand, because it's swept up so much, swept into so deeply. That's extra luminous. One description of this that I found, talking again about the path of Christ that we're all called to follow, is Andrew Harvey. I mentioned him before. He's a gay activist and a mystic who was born in India, raised Hindu and Christian kind of in his approach. His book on the mystical path to Christ, the Son of Man, is fascinating because it's coming purely from his own experience and then using the thought patterns and devotions and saints and practices from within that context. So he's not starting from a Christian mentality and then going down to the practice. He's doing the practice. So it's very unique. And this is what he has to say about the ascension, distinguished from the resurrection. This is what I'm talking about now. What does it add to the paradisiac state? And he says, so after the victory of resurrection, you will be transported to the next stage, the mystery of ascension, purified even of your resurrected form. So, see what I say? You're going even beyond the form, more and more into the emptiness part. In a way, again, you can hardly grasp. It's more luminous, more intense. Your essential being will be swept up into the origin. Now listen to the way he says this. The always birthing void light of the Father, Mother. Swallow that one. The always birthing void light of the Father, Mother. So the duality is overcome between the masculine and feminine. The void light, it's light, it's luminous, but it's the emptiness more than the form. It's the origin, as it just said. Always birthing, always giving forth, always in the cycle of life-giving. And then it always comes back. Unimaginable divine powers will now be yours to manifest healing light forms in all dimensions. Be a healer of light through light, as Christ is. To appear in and influence all forms of life in all the worlds for the good of God. It's using Christian language. But Buddhism would say to be healing, manifest as healing light in all dimensions, all worlds, to appear in and influence all sentient beings. Totally in accordance with the Zen view. As you know, I hope you know, another way of looking at it is in Mahayana, they make a distinction between the different bodies of the Buddha, which again are just different levels of consciousness. And the Rubin Museum, for example, has tried to show how this corresponds to certain Christian mysteries of Christ. Didn't really do such a good job of that, I didn't think. But you could say that the Nirmanakaya, which is the manifestation body, which is the Buddha body of just our body in this world of space and time. Then there's the Dharmakaya, which is the eternal, empty form, the Buddha body, which is the absolute. But in between is this kind of like this paradisiac state, this luminosity state, where emptiness and form are still working together. It's called the Sambhogakaya, which I think is fascinating, because it mirrors experience more than metaphysics, and it means the enjoyment body. It means more and more when all of yourself is integrated, you rise and ascend to a new level of consciousness and enjoyment and delight and luminosity before vanishing in the absolute. The absolute is up there for you. So it's that state of joy, which comes from, in Christian language, rising and ascending with Christ. In Buddhist language, the enjoyment body of the Buddha, which is us. Healed and luminous and life-giving and full of joy. And the ascension just makes it even pull further back into that void light, into that origin. Or to use the image of great Bodhisattva, that's the area of Samantabhadra, which is pure emptiness, sometimes shown with his consort, consciousness coming into being, but also called the Bodhisattva of wisdom in all actions. So in other words, we're going all the way up to emptiness, but still form and consciousness, right? Masculine and feminine together, the consort and the Bodhisattva. And the wisdom, the healing, pouring out again into action. Which is the Pentecost part, by the way. The Spirit pours forth, the healing light in all directions for all sentient beings. It's just that moment when you rejoin perfect intensity, that absolute while remaining connected in form. So those are different ways that the traditions present these different levels of consciousness. In other words, there are different proportions and experiences of emptiness and form, the deeper and the higher you go. And yet, the more you get close to the emptiness, nonetheless, the more it flows out. And the more connection there is, and the deeper connection, although you might not be quite as easily conscious of it, because it's so far transcendent. But nonetheless, it pours out into our daily life. So, does this make any sense? Above all, should be a matter of experience. Remember, it's not about geography, it's about levels of consciousness. And those levels of consciousness are measured by how connected you are, and how vastly connected you are, how intimately connected you are, how intensely connected you are to what used to be yourself, the absolute, but now it's so interconnected you don't. It's the marriage feast of reality, the divine dance, if you will, the joyous feast of life. So let us rise and let us ascend. Any comments or questions? Trying to see how ascended you all are.
Facebook.
What?
Facebook, right?
Facebook?
Yeah, connections.
Ah, okay. Well, this is the Facebook.
As far as the fullness of consciousness
Yes.
in the relative, we are the fullness of consciousness in the relative. And as we ascend, we will be the fullness of consciousness at that point in the relative.
Well, we always are, but the point is, the thing about being conscious, you have to be conscious of it. Otherwise, it's not fully consciousness. And ultimately, it's even beyond consciousness, right? But as we understand it. But yeah, that's the paradox, both in Christianity and in Buddhism. We already are it, but we're not aware of it sufficiently. And we're not. And one reason we're not is we're not integrated enough. We're not collected enough. We're not plugged in enough to realize the connection that's right there, and realize the consciousness that is right there. So that's why I have to ascend into the depths of reality itself in order to become what you are. Good. Well, let's sit for 2 minutes before we end.